Happy to have here today Rich McHugh from the University of British Columbia. University of Victoria, my mistake. Anything can happen when you're live. It even said Victoria on my notes here. Rich is a sessional lecturer in UVic's Faculty of Education, where he teaches courses on educational technology, multimedia, and online learning, including a fascinating course titled Learn to Make Anything. I might talk to you a little bit about that afterwards because I'm curious about that. Rich also manages the Digital Scholarship Commons in the library, which provides training and support for the UVic community. I'm going to invite you up here, Rich, to give us your presentation. And just a reminder, please put your questions into the chat because we can see it here on the comfort monitor, and we'll pass it over to you. All right. So, big green button is the forward, and if you need a laser, push the laser button.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here this morning, and I apologize for coming a little bit late. Speaking of falls, my elderly father had a bit of a fall this morning, and just a reminder that technology can be really useful, but for some things, it's not quite as helpful. So you need to have physical people that are caring and loving behind that technology. So here we go. Just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about so you can get a sense of where I'm going with the discussion. And a lot of what I'm talking about today comes from my experience with my EdTech class back in January when ChatGPT first hit. And it was quite an interesting experience. So the course is called Technology and Innovation in Education. And as we talked about I won't back up. As we talked about ChatGPT, which was the main tool at that point, it was really interesting to watch the students in the classroom because you could see initially they were quite excited about, oh, this could be really helpful in that assignment coming up, or things like that. But as we got into it, you could see them switching hats and they say, oh crap, I'm going to be teaching a classroom in a year or two, and my students are going to be using ChatGPT or Google Bard. And so they constantly went back and forth, and finally, a couple of people discovered that, hey, this could actually maybe be useful for me as a teacher. And so this is basically one of the prompts that one of the people generated. Create a course outline for a grade 8 class that will meet a BC curriculum standard. And they just had another course that talked about those standards, so they were quite familiar with this one in particular. And when they inputted the prompt, it created a course outline for the whole semester for that topic, or for the whole school year for that topic, at quite a high level. It wouldn't help them in the actual classroom, but one of the same student thought, well, what if I ask it to create a detailed lesson plan for Unit 1, the first unit that it sort of outlined for them. And sure enough, they put in create the lesson plan, and you may not be able to see that in the back, but it had learning objectives, materials, procedures, assessment, and they could do it for the whole semester if they wanted to. And it's key to note that these students had just covered this curriculum standard, so they knew it relatively well and were able to go through and say, oh wow, this actually is pretty good. It didn't bring anything extraneous or hallucinate, as they sometimes say with AI. But that's not always the case. I was the systems administrator and did a bunch of other things at the law faculty and law library for a long time, so I've talked with the law faculty about generative AI, and providentially, the day or 2 days before I gave the talk, this hit the news. There was a couple of lawyers in the States that used ChatGPT to generate their court brief. They submitted that to the court. The court gave it to the opposing judges. The judges, or the other lawyers, looked through it, and they thought, oh, there's some novel arguments in here, and let's look at the cases they're citing. And shockingly, there were no cases. ChatGPT fabricated 6 cases, attributed them to real judges, so the judges were real, the cases they cited were not real, and the 2 lawyers ended up getting fined $5,000 each and had to write letters of apologies to the 6 judges for misrepresenting them. So just to give you a bit of the spectrum, it can be really good sometimes, it can be really bad, often it's in the middle, but we need to be careful, and we'll go into more detail. So just before we go any further, just for the in the room folks, how many of you have played around with ChatGPT or any generative AI tools? So probably 80%, and the online folks, please go ahead and put that in the chat there too. How many have used it for a personal task? Like, I have potatoes and broccoli in the fridge, what can I do with this? It can actually be quite useful for those sorts of things. And who's used it for a work task? So probably a third use. I know one way that I use it at work constantly is letters of reference. I have a folder where I have letters of reference. I used to go in there and just sort of find one in the ballpark and then make a copy and modify it. ChatGPT can do, in my experience anyways, a pretty good job. I usually end up modifying it a little bit, but it can do a good job. And who's not used it at all? Yeah, so maybe 20% or so. Okay, it's just helpful for me to know where people are at. So we've got a fair number of people who have used it at least a little bit, a substantial group who haven't used it at all. So just so that we're on the same page, I'll just talk a little bit about generative AI. And when I say ChatGPT, just interpret that as generative AI in particular. So in the artificial intelligence realm, there's a few different fields that are important. I won't go into detail here, but this was actually quite helpful for me. But it's the large language models that we see in ChatGPT and Bard in particular, where you can ask questions. And it depends on natural language process and machine learning in order to do that. We've all used it, even if we haven't known it. So if you have a phone and you type, AI or generative AI is being used to help predict what you're going to type next. Google did this quite a while ago. Apple is a little bit later to the game, but you probably noticed a couple years ago the Apple predictive text got better. And I think with the latest version, they're starting to take into account what you're typing so that if you have a word that gets misspelled, it will eventually, they don't want to say this, they really want to say that, which is really helpful. My dog's name is Zeddy, and I can't remember what it was, but it was constantly giving me the wrong thing, but eventually he really does mean Zeddy. So another place that we've used it is Google searches. And this is pretty obvious. You start typing and it'll give you a list of things that you might want to be searching for. And for me, this is particularly useful on my phone where it's sort of more difficult to type. But generative AI is behind that as well. Now, this is a massive oversimplification, but this is at its root the way generative AI works. It has massive data sets that it's sort of sucked in from the internet and then uses algorithms and tons of computers to make connections between all of the words, sentences, and paragraphs. So if you type in, or if the generative AI itself is starting to create text and it puts it will try to predict what comes next. And that's pretty obvious when you're typing on your phone. In terms of generative AI, of course, it'll take into account your prompt to determine what comes next, of course, and so on and so on. And it does this at the word level, sentence level, and even to the paragraph level. Just one question in the chat, are Canadians able to access Bard? And you have to use a VPN to make it look like you're coming from outside of Canada because legislation in Canada has made Google nervous about making it available to Canadians. So anyways, I was visiting my daughter in the States, so I had easy access to ChatGPT or to Google Bard when I was down there. So this was the first prompt that I put into ChatGPT last December. I just finished writing a paper on informal credentials for academic makerspaces and how useful it is for job searching. And I typed that prompt in that you see there, and I was shocked. I'd literally written the abstract for my article about 2 months before, and arguably the abstract that ChatGPT generated was as good as the one that I wrote myself. It's not always that way, of course, but that was my first experience, and I was sort of really excited because I'm a bit of a tech geek, but at the same time I go, oh crap, I'm teaching a class in January. I was conflicted to say, but it was an interesting way to start my journey with generative AI tools. One thing to know, I was familiar with AI before. We'd had a student working for us who created an AI course or workshop for the Digital Scholarship Commons, but it was highly technical to the point that we had to put in some math background that you needed before you took the course. So we offered it once and a couple people weren't happy because they just didn't have the math required to work with the tools, which was basically Python scripts at that time. So it was much easier now, of course, with the web interfaces. Now there's some historical parallels to generative AI as the web interface of them. I remember back in 1993, that was the year that the internet became accessible to non-technical experts. And I can remember sitting in a computer lab at UVic when I was an undergraduate student and seeing the results, I think it was of the Lillehammer Olympics, and just being amazed that I didn't have to wait to the next day and look at it in the paper. I could actually see a picture and get the, who got the gold, silver, bronze. It was amazing. Little did we know, or myself or anyone else know, what the internet or the web would become, 15, 20 years later. News was probably a bit of a no-brainer, but all of the other things that we're able to do, like Airbnb, who would have thought of that? This is a while back, but eBay, that was impressive for the time and what it was able to do. And I think a few years down the road, we'll look back at 2023 as the year that AI or generative AI became accessible to the people. Just thinking back to that workshop that we had, which was, you basically had to be a comp sci or math student to take it and get something out of it. Now anyone can sit down in front of a computer, log on to ChatGPT or some of the other tools that are come out and generate human-sounding text. Accuracy is another issue, but it'll sound human, at least. Now here's ChatGPT of the recent past, the programmable calculator. ChatGPT from the past for education. I should be more specific. Math profs freaked out when these came out because a lot of the assignments and exams or evaluations were predicated on the fact that they'd have to use pen and paper. Or maybe a calculator, but the programmable calculator was a game changer. And they had to change the way, probably not the way they taught, but at least change the way that they framed their assignments and did their assessments. And eventually, they were able, and again, I'm not a math prof, but eventually, from what I understand, they were able to figure out where students really needed to, pen and paper it, just to understand the core concepts that they need later, and when it made sense just to move to the calculator because it was just spending extra time that they didn't need to because they already knew the underlying concepts and had the learning objectives nailed already. How many have heard of the Gartner hype cycle? Okay, so a few, maybe 10, 15%. I'll just go over it quickly because I think it really is useful to frame generative AI in this context. So we have a new technology, like the web, for example. There's a lot of excitement about it. People trying to figure out what to do gets really, really excited, at least in a certain segment of the population, to the point that the expectations are probably overinflated, at which point the bubble gets popped. There's a bit of a backlash. We go into the trough of disillusionment. But gradually, people figure out, well, it's not great for everything, but it is good for these things. And we get to the plateau of productivity. I don't know if many of you remember the Segway scooter, those two-wheeled thingies that are kind of goofy. I've never ridden one, thank goodness. I would have been tempted if I'd had the money at the time, but that wasn't a problem for me. But anyways, people are saying this is going to change the way that we organize our cities, and it was really, really inflated expectations. Once people started using them, they realized they were sort of cumbersome, and they were, useful, but they weren't going to change the way that cities were designed and the way people use cities. But eventually, they figured out, there are some use cases where it's useful. Tourist tours in, larger areas, it's quite useful to help people get around. For security folks in malls and airports, it can be quite useful to get around quickly where you can't really use a car or other four-wheel devices. Again, this is just me guessing. I suspect we're not quite to peak of inflated expectations. We're probably getting close, but only time will tell. Who knows? Maybe there will be another advance because things are changing quite quickly that'll make things even more frothy than they already are. But we're probably getting close to peak of inflated expectations, at which time there will be a strong backlash. There is some pushback already, of course, but there will probably be a bigger backlash. And eventually we'll go to the bottom and then figure out where it's useful. Like, for example, the student that created our AI workshop for the library. She was doing her master's thesis on using AI to interpret X-rays, which is actually really could be extremely useful, even though we don't see that from our perspective as patients. So what fears do we, and maybe just think about this yourself, what fears do you personally have around generative AI tools? And I'm not an expert on transfer and articulation, so I have some ideas on where your fears might be, but something just to keep in mind as I go through the rest of my presentation here. What I do know about is fears that professors have. And this isn't a comprehensive list, but these are some of the top ones. A real fear about the accuracy and quality of the information. It can be really good sometimes, it can be really bad, as we've talked about. When my ed tech class, one of the examples I gave about the quality and accuracy is my daughter lobbied the municipality to allow backyard goats for like 4 years. They finally approved it, but we had to have a place for these miniature goats to live. We had this playhouse that was about 5 feet off the ground, and we needed to build a ramp so that the goats could get in and out. Anyway, so I thought this would be a cool one. Let's get ChatGPT to give us a design for the ramp. We'd done this years ago, but this was just in class. So I typed in the prompt, and it was a good prompt, and it spit out a list of materials and then some directions on how to do it, and they looked reasonable until you look closely and realize that it was building a 5-foot ramp, 5-foot long ramp for a 5-foot tall structure, which basically means it's a wall, not a ramp. So again, and that's one other thing, it's not good at math, ironically. It will often make math errors, so just a little heads up there. And for woodworking, I wouldn't recommend it, at least currently. It may change and get better, but for woodworking, it's not great. Another one is fear that students may not develop critical thinking skills, and this is completely legitimate. If critical thinking is a learning objective, you need to, or professors need to modify how they do their assignments to make generative AI less useful, and we'll talk about some tactics for that. Generative AI could reinforce existing biases, and that's for sure true. It's got a strong US bias just based on the training data. There are lots of other biases as well, but this is definitely something that we need to be aware of. And if we're talking to students, of course, we need to make them aware of that too. Another one is cheating. This is probably the one that comes to most people's mind first. I have 5 children, 2 of whom are in university right now. So I've talked to them about it, and yes, it is happening. Ironically, one of them is a software engineer, and that's one of the easiest places to cheat. Not that she has cheated, just to be clear. But unlike an essay where you have to go through and verify that it's reasonable and it's accurate, with code, you can actually run it and see the outputs and see if it actually works. So it's the English professors and comp sci professors, ironically, that I have the most sympathy for at this point. And just a disclaimer, we are in hot take territory here. Things are evolving really quickly still, so what I say now may be different. When I talked to Law in the spring, literally 2 days after I gave the talk, a tool was released called Blue Jay, which is an AI tool for Canadian tax law, corporate tax law. So things are evolving quickly. So in terms of trends for discouraging the use of generative AI in the classroom, one excellent one is to limit citation sources. So some professors will limit them to articles and books that are in the syllabus. That's one way to do it. Another really ingenious one that I was giving a similar talk last week, and one of the professors said, oh, one thing I'm doing is I find a journal article with at least two authors, 2 or more authors, and then if I can find another journal article on a different topic in the same year by those 2 authors, the generative AI will conflate those in creating the output, and it's much easier to spot that type of error, which is not necessarily proof, but it can make them look deeper to see if there's anything else going on there. Another one is to base an assignment on an in-class discussion. So it's a lot, the AI isn't privy to that discussion, so it's more difficult for them to generate useful and relative text for that in-class discussion. Modular assignments is another one, and this is probably just good pedagogy or good teaching method, but to break down the assignment so that, for example, if you're doing an essay, they'd do their thesis statement first and submit that. Then they'd maybe do a bibliography next with sources that they are relevant to it. Again, it doesn't eliminate the use of AI, but it becomes less useful, especially if the professor gives in-class time for the students to do the thesis statement or other aspects of it, so that if they have questions, they can ask the professor, and the professor can sort of see who's struggling and who's not. Works much better in smaller classes as opposed to a 300 psych class or something like that, of course. Another one is just going old school, bring back the pen and paper in-class test or essay. And definitely one way you could go, but I would hate to give my handwritten essay to someone and ask them to read it. They might have trouble just reading it. There's one technical solution to that, and this was from like 12, 13 years ago. I helped implemented some software called Exam4 in the Faculty of Law at UVic, which locks down the web browser. And this is for in-person exam. It's not a take-home exam, but they come in, they have their laptop, this software is installed. Once they launch it, it locks out everything except a text box, and you can enable a spell checker if the professor wants to or not, and then it gets submitted securely that way. But it does need to be in person for this. I wouldn't suggest the remote proctoring software because they tend to have a bunch of problems. Another one would be to use an alternate assignment format. So instead of the essay, if writing isn't one of the learning objectives, an alternate assignment format, and some of the things that we've seen work well is infographics, for example. Pedagogically, an infographic is really nice because it forces the learner to identify the important things, summarize them, and then find visuals that support the main points of it. Again, this is, I think, a really solid one, but we actually lead workshops around campus at UVic on how to use Canva to create infographics and posters. Just in the past few weeks, Canva has come out with an AI module that you have to pay for, but I need to do some testing on that. So this may change, or may have changed already, but as of a month ago, this was one of my go-to assignments. Another one would be just to have a presentation. Generative AI could be helpful in creating a script for the presentation, but not nearly as helpful if you have a question and answer portion. Actually not helpful at all for a question and answer. So if I was to do this, I would give less weight to the presentation and much more weight to the Q&A, because if they've used generative AI extensively for the presentation, they're going to have trouble with the question and answer. Now, if you've got a larger class, you could take up several class blocks just doing presentations. So one option would be to have them record their presentation or do it in a podcast format, which is quite popular. Just a shameless plug for the UVic Libraries Digital Scholarship Commons. We've got workshops for all of these available publicly in their Creative Commons license on GitHub. So if you're interested, go for it. And trends for incorporating generative AI in classes. So if a professor wants to incorporate it, there's a few things. The first thing we'd recommend they do before they do anything, and that's for people who want to include it or not, is to put their assignment into ChatGPT and run it a couple of times, because the output will change, and just see how it does. If it does, a B plus job on the output, if ChatGPT does that, probably time to change the assignment somehow to make it less useful. One of the things that professors will do to use it in the class is to ask ChatGPT a question and then in class analyze the response together. Usually works well if the professor can find something that has some good quality answers mixed in with some bad stuff, so you can say, oh, this is good, but oh, look at that. Did you notice that they didn't talk about this or that, or that isn't correct, that part of it. Another, and this is one that I really like, is have ChatGPT generate an essay and then have the students evaluate the essay. ChatGPT can do some of the evaluation if you give it a rubric, which I haven't talked to any professors who've admitted to doing that for evaluation, but especially as an in-class task where they do it in class, this can be quite useful. But no matter what, we and professors should be teaching students about ChatGPT, identifying its strengths and weaknesses, and modeling how to use it safely and ethically, for sure. This is a flowchart that I've modified a little bit. It's from the UNESCO AI in Higher Education report, which is actually quite good. If you Google it, it's really easy to find. But this is something that we share with professors and share with our students. It starts with, does your instructor allow generative AI? If it's a no, then it's definitely not safe to use. If they do allow, the student should ask themselves, does it matter if the output is true? I've done some hilarious game reports for my old boys soccer team, just putting in the score, the names of the teams, and then do it in the voice of the Old Testament or something like that. And I ran it through a text-to-voice generator in English with an English accent, as in England, and it was, anyways, I got full marks for that, but accuracy is not important. Humor is important for that. So if accuracy is important, then the student needs to ask themselves, do they have the expertise to verify that the output is accurate? And in some cases, that might be true. Most cases, if they're taking the class, that's probably not true. So if no, then it's unsafe. If yes, last one, and just think about those two lawyers. Are you able to take full responsibility, legal, moral, ethically, for missed inaccuracies? And then if yes, okay, that's an ChatGPT or generative AI is an option. If not, you should probably go old school. I mentioned this before, but it really is key to demonstrate it in class. It's one thing just to talk about, a mistake or an error that ChatGPT makes, completely different to see it in action. So we recommend professors do some testing so that they know something that will, or at least a few prompts that will demonstrate the pros and cons of using generative AI in the specific subject area that they're teaching. So getting back to facility transfer and mobility, another disclaimer, I'm not an expert on transfer and mobility. I do have a lot of background in technology and with generative AI, but I did lean quite heavily on this article back from May from Wally Boston. And I'll put this slide up again at the end just so that you can have access to it. But if you're interested in exploring generative AI in the transfer setting, this would be a great place to start. And I will put it up at the end again. This is just a quote from the article. Generative AI doesn't currently have the ability to understand the nuances of a syllabus the way we would, or the way you would, I should say. And your expertise in that area can't be understated. The good news is at least you'll be able to see if it's making mistakes if you look for it. So what are some tasks that it could potentially help us with? Course description comparison, potentially syllabus comparison, and I'm sure there are other uses. And for those in the chat, if you can think of other uses, I'd love to see them, although the chat screen is blinking on me, so I may not see it right away here. So first off, course description comparison. This is the prompt that I use. I put into, in this case, Google Bard. And then after it, I put 2 course descriptions for courses that were somewhat similar, but obviously a little bit different. And you're not going to be able to read this very well at the back, but there's the course description for course 1, description of course 2, and it is important to label them so that ChatGPT knows where course description 1 and 2 begin and end. But after you've done that, it will output similarities, differences, and do a sort of a textual comparison of them. And it did a pretty good job at that level. You're giving it well-defined text. You're not asking it to invent or to write thing given on the prompt. It's just summarizing. And typically, the generative AI tools do a pretty good job at summarizing. One thing to keep in mind, well, I'll get to it when we do the syllabus, because that's where it's important. So I didn't do a syllabus comparison just because it was pretty bad. but I had a student do one using ChatGPT 4, which is the paid version, and I'll talk a bit about that in a minute, but what I did have it do is just do a summary of a syllabus for a course I teach, just because I know it well and could quickly scan it. So this is the prompt that I put in. Can you identify the course objectives, content, assessment method, textbook, and so on for this course outline to follow? And then this is the course outline. I just literally copied it, found the relevant areas, I copied it, and then I pasted it. And this is the summary of the course objectives. And it did a very good job. It did help that my course objectives, I am a big fan of bullet points. I had them in bullet point already, but it used bullets too, which was endearing to me, and it did a good job summarizing them. When I looked closely at it, it wasn't building me a 5-foot ramp for a 5-foot playhouse. The next section was the summary, and it actually did a pretty good job at the course summary, probably as good as I would have done if I was just quickly doing something, so pretty good. Next one is assessment methods. This class is actually a complete, incomplete, or pass-fail course, and that really wasn't in the course out. I guess it was at the very bottom. That may have been my fault for not copying the whole thing, but it did not a bad job. I said not that good. I'm going to change my judgment because I remembered I didn't copy the bottom part, so it did an okay job with course assessment. And the textbooks. There are no textbooks in the class, but we do provide online resources, and it did I'm not sure if it said no textbooks, but at least it identified the things that they would be using in the course. Course hours, we didn't really have course hours in terms of credit hours in the course outline. That's in the course summary. So we'll say to be determined, because if it had been in there, I suspect it would have pulled that out. Prerequisites, there is a prerequisite for this course, but it isn't in the course outline, so to be determined on that. It probably would have pulled it out if it had been clearly labeled. So just overall, and I know I'm sort of repeating a little bit here, but you really need to treat the output of generative AI like it's an over-eager but inexperienced intern. You really need to check their work. And this is, I did not do that drawing. It was DALL-E, the Microsoft image creator, so it actually gave me 4 images. This one was the best, so I used it. But anyways, that's fun to play around with if you're looking for funny imagery or any imagery for your slides. Yeah, always thoroughly check. Unless it's your soccer game report, of course. Huge thing, don't put any personally identifiable information in the generative AI tools, because ChatGPT for sure, I haven't looked at the fine print for Bard, but ChatGPT, it will use your prompts as training data, and that prompt information could end up in someone's output who's done a related prompt or a query. So if, don't put any student information in. ChatGPT, the Pro version in particular, can generate really nice charts now. So if you're, putting in, make sure there's no identifiable student information going in. Same thing with proprietary information. If there's institutional data that is not public, you wouldn't want to put that in there to generate a beautiful chart, just as one example. So this is the article again. And I'm going to skip over this quick because I've got another link that goes to a summary with the link to this article in a second here. So from my perspective, the main takeaways are do some testing, not using any personal or identifiable or proprietary information, of course, just to see if it's helpful to you, in particular in your circumstances. It might be, it might not be. And I wouldn't just do one test, I'd do several tests, maybe try ChatGPT, maybe try Bard. There are other tools out there as well. If you do some Googling, you'll find them. Just see if they're helpful. And trial and error, I've seen they're calling it prompt engineering. It is a thing. It's not that hard to learn if you look at a couple of articles. But if you're brand new to ChatGPT or have just used it a little bit, looking at some online resources for prompt engineering could be helpful in crafting prompts that are effective in getting the responses you're looking for. And again, just to reiterate, you need to check everything that comes out of it because it, like I mentioned before with math, it does not do math well. It does it very poorly. But for creating human-sounding text, it can do a good job, and sometimes will do an excellent job. Never include personally identifying information, and same thing with proprietary data. So that link there is to a blog post that I put up that has links to that Wally Boston article, as well as some other resources that could be, I think would be helpful for those who are interested, so I'll leave that up. But are there any questions from the room or from the folks in chat?
Is this mic on? Okay. We do have some microphones in the back. I'll ask staff to grab the microphones if they've got them already. So if you're in the room, please put your hands up if you have a question for Rich. This was very fascinating. I really appreciated the comparison tool and the transfer credit tools. I have used ChatGPT on occasion just to play around. I did ask it at one point to write 500 words on the BC transfer system. And it was pretty accurate, I have to admit. Like, you know, I'd say it got us 80 to 90% of the way there. I've also played around with asking it to write in a specific style. So you said write it in the language of the Old Testament. I asked it to write in the format of Randy Macho Man Savage, former professional wrestler, who has a very distinct speaking style. And not only was it accurate, but it was very hilarious as well. We do have some questions in the chat, so I'm actually just going to read them out to you.
Got one person.
Oh, do we have one in the front? Oh, sorry, let's go with the audience.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was an excellent presentation. I wonder, what are your thoughts on the accuracy and quality changes that we can expect in the coming months, weeks, months, years? So it doesn't do math now, but when will it be able to? And I imagine, will the accuracy improve?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There was a quote a couple months back from the head of ChatGPT. Can't remember the underlying company, but he said that ChatGPT was not designed, and the architecture is not designed for accuracy, that new technology is going to have to be incorporated. So I know they're working on it. And one thing, I forgot to come back to the syllabus comparison. So 2 days ago, so after I submitted these slides, one of my grad students used ChatGPT 4 to compare two syllabuses. And it actually did not a bad job, not perfect, but better, much better than the free version of ChatGPT. And the one important thing that I think probably would have improved it is labeling each of the sections that you're interested in evaluating. So if one is more a sort of a block of paragraphs without labels or course objectives, textbook, putting those labels in will increase its accuracy quite a bit. But you got to pay $20 a month for that, which isn't a huge amount, especially if you're using it day in and day out. But yeah, it will improve. The math side, I suspect they'll probably have something that will trigger it, say, oh, this is math, we need to send it to a different place to do that processing, and then incorporate that back into the natural language speaking part of the app. But not there yet, but yeah, keep on testing. Yeah.
We have a question in the back.
Hi. Oh, thank you. You can hear me. My name's Lindsay from TRU. Thank you so much. I'm curious about summarizing. I thought that it looks like it does a great comparison, just summarizing the text I put in, but I thought that it works by drawing on all the intelligence that it has in its system. And I've heard also that maybe there's something called transparent AI that they're working on that would show you, okay, it's only used this text that you've put in or not.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about that.
Yes, in my experience, it does a pretty good job at just using its whole corpus of data to get the language down. And if you specifically say, summarize this New York Times article or compare these two course outlines, it can do a pretty good job. But I've got a brother who's a corporate tax lawyer, and where he's working, they're testing some AI tools for their corporation. And they don't want their data getting out, of course. But he said it's useful, but because they're not able to draw on all the other lawyers out there, it's not as useful as it could be just using their own training data. Google has a tool that's not available in Canada, and I got on the wait list but haven't gotten into it yet, where you can have it point at your own local repository to draw for sort of facts as well as your voice. I think it's called LM, something LM, but having it look at your own data and be able to draw, especially as you get more into your career, that can become increasingly useful, not as useful for an undergraduate student. But, yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it just sometimes it's very important that it only uses the text that you want it to use. So it's just qualitative data analysis.
Yeah.
So that's why, you know, I didn't end up using it because I thought I'm not sure that it's only using just this.
Yeah. That AI course or workshop that my student created a few years ago, it was to do sentiment analysis for qualitative data. And it worked pretty good, but you needed like advanced math to run what she was doing back then just because ChatGPT wasn't available. The other thing about summarizing documents is they have some limits placed on how long the documents can be, just to not use up too many resources, server resources. And the effect of that is if you put in a really long document, it will just do weird stuff. So I thought for preparation to talk to some law profs, I put in a judgment from Canley, which is an open repository of judgments across Canada. And I just copy and pasted the URL because you don't need to copy the text necessarily. And it was about a court case in Manitoba, employment law, where someone got fired because anyways, it doesn't really matter. They got fired. I put that in and was expecting a nice summary because in my experience it had done a good job, but then it said it was referring to a Manitoba case, so it was still a Manitoba human rights case, but it was a student who was wearing a sort of pro-LGBTQ shirt and got kicked out of their religious school or got suspended for that. So completely, like it just went completely off the rails, different case. And it took me a while to figure out it was very likely because of the length of the article, but just went, you know, more than useless. It was actively, you know, impeding what you're trying to do in that case. So, yeah, that is a dial that they can turn up and down. If you're using the paid version, you probably can get more data in there than the free versions. Yeah.
We have a question from the online audience. In order to facilitate the articulation process, should course outlines now encompass their institutional program and course policies regarding AI and provide a clear rationale for their inclusion?
Yes, the short answer is yes. One other thing in BC in particular, if the tool is not approved by your institution and gone through a privacy review, professors, well, some probably do, but they shouldn't require people to use the tool. You need to have an alternate accommodation for using that tool. So if they are going to put it in there, they need to go through a privacy assessment, which I'm confident ChatGPT would not pass right now. But what you can do is say, for those who want to, like who uses ChatGPT and would be interested, show of hands, okay, let's make some groups so that people who maybe do not want to use it can look over the shoulder of the person who does do it. You can also do in-class demonstrations using your own account as a professor, but you know, having something in the policy there would be important. And right now, you would have to include use of ChatGPT as optional or something like that, because I don't think it would pass muster in BC with the privacy reviews process in place. So.
We've got another question from the chat that I think is quite good. What are your thoughts on educators relying on ChatGPT for grading student papers? And then perhaps I'll also add my own add-on to that. What are your thoughts about using ChatGPT to help with the admission of students to, you know, when there is a subjective evaluation?
Yeah. So for grading the students, I would say no. It would probably be relatively reliable, but on the edge cases where it did make mistakes, I wouldn't want to be on the other end of that conversation after. What I would suggest they do, and this has has pedagogical support, is have students evaluate each other's work. And there's actually a lot of learning that can come out of that. They need some instruction on how to do that in a way that isn't aggressive, of course, and in a gentle way. And it's something that I do in my classes, not on major assignments, but on smaller assignments, because it is quite useful for students to see what each other is doing. And it's either, I'm grading your little writing there, and I thought, wow, I did not do nearly as good job or as much work. I better up my game. Or I do someone else and think, wow, they did a bad job. I'm doing okay so far. So that would be the route that I would be tempted to go. And it does scale where there's software out there that facilitates that. But you get the double benefit of feedback from the student without your time as a professor, and the students do some learning in the process as well, which can be helpful. And yours was using it in, I think it could be a good tool, like looking at the course descriptions in particular. I suspect it would do a good job. I have a sample size of 1 or 2, so I would do some testing, but my intuition is those, paragraph of text comparison, it would probably do a good job. The syllabuses, it may do a good job. The free version of ChatGPT did not. But putting some labels in and using the pro version, it did better, but again, a sample size of 1 there. So you'd need to do some testing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we have one more question here from the audience.
Hi, my name is Lil-Ann. I'm also from Victoria. I appreciated your statement about the challenge to writing instructors and computer science instructors. And I agree that the written assessment in the classroom is a great solution. And some of the other solutions you had, I could see how they applied to the writing instructors. I'm definitely interested in how they would apply to the computer science or the technical instructors.
Yeah. I've thought a little bit I've got a daughter who's doing software engineering down in the States. I say she's majoring in soccer and minoring in software engineering, but yeah, for the comp sci, I think breaking it down into smaller chunks would probably be the way to do that, and maybe doing some in class as one solution. But the reason why I have empathy for both is I would struggle in both situations, even with a programming background. My eldest son is a software engineer, and they had a couple of employees leave just because they had other opportunities. They didn't replace them. And he says they're still probably 20% more efficient. It's a software team of 8, so they lost a quarter of their staff, and they became more efficient just by using the pro version, the Copilot, which is the coding version. And they use it in their operations as well. They had to write these biographies for realtors, and someone had to actually go Google and find something. They're using ChatGPT for that quite successfully, and it just generates it on the fly using their API. So there are some really interesting use cases from a business perspective that I suspect might be helpful for you, but you need to do a lot of testing. And in terms of the comp sci and English profs, English I think is easier than comp sci. You could write out algorithms. I remember doing that back in the day, but yeah, lots of empathy. Or in class, I guess, yeah.
We'll do one more question. In the hand in the back. Leon, are you able to pass back the mic? Oh, you got the mic. Good.
Thanks. Louise Danhauer from Vancouver Community College. There are apps that claim to be able to detect if students are using ChatGPT when they hand in their work. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on those apps?
My experience is they're not reliable. So in my class, I allowed the use of ChatGPT, but I did take the text to the AI generators, and it didn't detect not one of them it detected as being AI generated. So I talked to the students and I said, did you just copy and paste the text? So, no, I did a little light editing because of, it wasn't, deleted something because it wasn't relative or just added a little bit. But light editing, not wholesale changing, and that was enough for the 3 detectors that I tried to say extremely unlikely to be AI generated, which is technically true. It wasn't completely AI generated, but The other thing I think I mentioned is that research was done in the spring looking at AI generators from back then, so maybe they've improved, but it misclassified English language learners' written text as AI generated when it was actually written by them at a much higher level than English language speakers. So that's another thing that would make me hesitant to rely on it. Some of the little hacks probably would be better, like the two authors' articles in the same year. That would be a better indicator. There was a graduate student who recently got kicked out of their program at UVic because the voice of their dissertation changed dramatically in one section, and that raised red flags with their advisor, and I think they admitted to using it and are no longer at the school, unfortunately, but that's one way to do it. If you've got a history with them, you need to know what they write like before.
Well, I would like to thank you, Rich, for that fascinating presentation. I think I learned a lot. I really appreciate everybody with all the questions. Rich has put up his contact information. There is also a link to his blog, which contains links to the slides that were used for this deck as well. I'm definitely going to be checking out that article by Wally Boston.
Yeah.
That sounds like a name that was generated by AI. You know, like if my name was Mike Vancouver. But yeah, I want to thank you for here. Please, a round of applause for you, Vic.
Thank you.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're just going to take a quick coffee break. We're going to be back exactly at 10:45. For those of you that are online on the stream, please go into the next room, and we will see you there at 10:45. And please go help yourself to coffee in the foyer. Thank you.